Good morning, friends. Hello. Good morning to you. Hope this day is treating you well. There is goodness in it. Hello, everyone. How are you today? Hope that it is a gorgeous day outside. I hope you get out to spend some time in it and that you have beauty in your day. Good morning, everyone. Mug up this morning. Very nice little sticker from our friends at Moose Mountain. Mountain Moose? Whatever. Yeah. All right. Good morning, everybody. All right. Let's get going this morning. There is a just, hey, Vicky, good morning to you. So, good morning. It is the 20th day of August on this Tuesday at 11:11, and I hope you are well and good and whole, enjoying the beauty of this day. It is, there is this pretty famous line from the Paul's letter to the church in Philippi in the second chapter. But it is a part of a wider series of instructions, and I think it seems to call to me these days about offering us maybe a way to encounter the world as it is and maybe our relationships as they are in these days. So I want to. This is from the second chapter of the book of the epistle um, Philippians. It just starts at the fifth verse and goes through the 13th. So, but this is Paul's injunction to the church. But how are we to be with people? He says how we have people of faith to be with others. This is this. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. Being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even on the cross. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth, under the earth, every tongue acknowledge that Jesus is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Therefore, my dear friends, as you have always obeyed, not only in my presence, but now much more in my absence, continue to work out your salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you to will and to act in order to fulfill his good purpose. That now that line, the famous line of all that is work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling. This notion of working things out, about how we are to work things out with ourselves and with God and with one another. There's a lot of working out that kind of needs can need a little doing these days. Um, we have to we can work out how we are to be with people that we have our political differences with, people we have economic differences with, people we have the way in which we're to engage the world and be a help in it or to be a hindrance in it, that we have to work this out. Now, this notion of working things out, it actually has in it this notion of a very different notion. So it calls it this way. He says, because look at what Jesus says when he starts talking about this. He says that that working out is described in how we are to be in relationship to each other. Because really, if we think about it, and I want you to ponder on this, because this is the it might be the focus of what we're talking about today. How we are to be in relationship with each other is really about how we work everything else about ourselves and about the world out. We think, our imagination tells us that we are a particular way, or we have a particular belief, or we have a particular desire, or a preference, or whatever it is, that we are somehow formed in this way. And I'm not saying God doesn't form us in some ways from our origin, but I'm saying and then we kind of pitch that against the world, or we pitch that against other people, and so we'll have this some people will like, some people we won't like, some things will be good. Some of us will be Ford people, some of us will be Chevy people, some of us will like cilantro, some of us won't. Cilantro, by the way, tastes like dial soap. Don't care who you are. It's true that we have all these inborn preferences, in-made preferences in which we are made, and from our perspective it really looks like this, and it's not just a deception. It is a legitimate way in which we come to see the world. But the problem with that is that the world makes us back just as much, if not more. That our identity actually is formed, like who we are is not just formed by us, but it's also formed against the pastiche, the overlay, the relationships in which we are part of, and that they come to make us up as much as we come to be formed. Now we are so locked in the kind of the Western post Enlightenment idea of personhood, of I'm an individual, I'm a person, I'm a me, and I'm just the way God made me, and this is how I am, and we all have this kind of imprinted upon us so deeply. It's even difficult for us to see and understand that as much as we are made from within, we are even more so made from without. People talk about time traveling, like, oh, it would be so cool if I lived back in the, Middle Ages, or I would live back in the 19th century before electricity, or I lived back in, or that people have these dreams of being. But the problem with those dreams, the problem with those ideas is if you become a person of the 19th century, if you become a person of the Middle Ages, you're no longer you. Now that might baffle us a little bit. Like, what do you mean I'm no longer me? Of course I would be me. But who are you if you've never been exposed to Shakespeare? Who are you if you've never been exposed to your favorite piece of music? Who are you if you've never been exposed to your favorite person in the whole wide world? Who are you if you've never been exposed to the mom that you had, or the dad that you had? Who are you if you've never been exposed to a world that moved faster than a horse? Like, who are you? That who you fundamentally are is radically different than the person that you are today. And so this illusion that we have that we're a person that we could just plug up and place in any other time, space, context, series of relationships is a lie. That we are far more formed, far more informed by who we are from the outside than who we are from the inside. Now, why does this matter when we talk about working out our salvation? Because let's look at what Jesus does when he lays out how we are to be. When he talks, when how Paul instructs the church in Philippi to be. What did he say? He says, how are you to be in relationships with one another? Which is this intimation of what is most important? Your internal realities of your preferences and your peccadillos and the things that you want and the way that you want them, and there better not be ketchup on my burger, or or is it this the actual way that things really are, which we are vastly more more formed, vastly more informed by the world and the relationships around us, and that we are far that we, as Christ was, are invited instead to let ourselves be formed and informed by those that which is around us, which is not to say we are to be like the world and to like just do what people want us to do and just make everybody happy and placate the whole world. It's not, don't hear what I'm saying. Look at the way Jesus lays this, look at the way Paul lays this out in terms of Jesus' ministry. When he says, how should we be? We should be like Christ Jesus in your relationships. And what does that mean? First, he empties himself out. That God comes into the world to empty himself out from humanity. Like, I have my desires. I know the way I like to have things. Jesus and God and the most perfect good and the most perfect truth came into this world. And you know who they had to deal with? Lepers and tax collectors and Romans that wanted to execute them and treacherous Pharisees that wanted to destroy him, that he had to deal with the betrayal of a close disciple and dear friend. He had to deal with, and not even to deal with, talk about dealing with just the physicality of being. He had to deal with having, with being embodied and incarnate in this world. That, do you not believe that God had preferences for how his relationships might have been? And the people in which he would be in relationship to? In fact, much of the Gospels is laid out in terms of love one another as I have loved you, kind of this invitation to being other than we are, because of what he was dealing with in the way in which people were. But what is his response to that? It's not like I'm gonna straighten you people out. Like I'm here to make sure y'all toe the line, and if you don't do what I say, I got a hot place for you. That is not the gospel, and that is not what Jesus says. That Jesus comes by emptying himself out and is obedient to the cross. He is obedient unto the cross. What does that mean? The world's full of suffering, friends. If you haven't figured it out by now, the world is filled with suffering. Your heart on any given day can be filled with suffering. Your body on any given day can be filled with suffering. You know, one of the things about aging that everybody realizes at some point or another is that what you are witnessing is the body betraying you. When all you need to do is have an illness or have an injury, and you realize that the physicality is not who, you know, though it is yours and it is who you are and what you are in part, but it is it is not, it is a betrayal of your very being. You know, I look at the guy with this big gray mop on his face and it's like, who's that guy? But to be obedient to the cross is to be willing to be in relationship, to be willing to love the world around us, to be willing to love the people who encounter us in the midst of our suffering, in the midst of them disagreeing with us, in the midst of them acting like Pharisees or acting like betrayers or acting like anything else, that we may empty out our own desires so that we can put first and foremost the relationship with the people around us. That does not mean that we have to sell out one piece of our value or values or what we believe. Certainly Christ does not. He goes in fact to the cross for the very overcoming of death, for the overcoming of that which is wrong in the world. But that happens through us not insisting on our way or the highway, but in fact staying in relationship even to the place that we have to encounter our own suffering. Staying in relationship with, and remember, in good congregational fashion, in the way in which we understand to be in covenant with each other, with the people around us, and with our fellow pilgrims, the people that we encounter along the way, but also to be in covenant with God Himself. That we keep our relationships open with God, and that we make nothing out of all of our molehills and our peccadillos and the things in which we would call important. We let go of the idea that the world isn't going to somehow break us, that the cross is but we take up the responsibility for our own suffering and we shoulder it. And then we let in God, who works in you will act in order to fulfill His good purpose. You see, when we talk about this idea of getting to of working out our salvation with fear and trembling, it is this Greek word called kata. It means to work something down, to have a big equation. You can think of it in a mathematical way. If you ever remember doing equations, you have these huge kind of things on each side, a plus, b plus, parent times, whatever, and then on the other side of the equation. But when you solve these equations, you get down to a particular defined conclusion. You get down to a decisive end and conclusion, a finality point. And that's the way we're to understand when Paul's saying to the church, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, with awe and with to come into this thing with awe, but to work it down to a point, to work it down to a decisive finality, to an end conclusion. Work out your salvation. Now, are you going to do that in a weekend retreat of meditation? Are you going to do that in standing in the line at Market Basket? Are you going to do that? No, that's the course of a lifetime, friends. That is the task of a lifetime. It is the task of the spiritual walk of following Christ through this world, is this process of us working these things out to its final end, to its conclusion, to solve the complicated equation of our life down to a thing. And I tell you all that to remind you that in fact there is a solution. There is a faith in which can be a part of your life. And if you've done this for a little while, if you've been a part of this, you realize this is true. You realize the things that as a younger person you used to freak out about or really used to get under your skin, somehow now you have a little more grace to be able to say, you know what, that's just that dog just doesn't hunt anymore. Like that just doesn't. I'm not gonna, when that siren goes off, I'm not gonna run. I'm not gonna run for it anymore. That part of our maturation in faith is understanding that some of these complicated equations that we used to have to scribble away at and solve for ourselves are now getting simpler and simpler and simpler. That in some ways that we are working our faith out, and we can see this. We can see it in our lives from our maybe Sunday school faith to something that when trouble strikes and we work through something difficult, or great grief comes and we carry and shoulder that in our lives. When suffering arrives, we find ourselves rather than rebelling against our suffering or wallowing in our suffering, we find ourselves just obedient to the cross, and that we see that the lives that we've lived are a little more worked out, and that they're a little more true, and that's the great promise of this, which is what I want to offer you today is this reminder that there's a solution to the equation. There is a working it out, and that it's not your process to do. You're not completely in charge of this thing. in terms of, making sure you become as wise, or you become as peaceful, or you manage to become as healthy, or you manage to get all the right things in place in your life. I'm not saying we abrogate our responsibilities, but I'm saying what our responsibilities look like is much more like letting God do God's work in our life and be obedient to the welcoming and the suffering. And that is, as we have emptied out and as we have let go, we can instead let the Spirit of God in to fulfill his good purposes in our life. That, more than anything, has this way of bringing us into this larger relationship, about whether it's the person down the street that you end up fighting with, or whether it's the relationship with your own soul and your own heart and your own being, wherever you find it, that there is a working it out. There is a peace that surpasses all understanding. There is God's process with you that is at work right now, and in this moment, wherever you find yourself, wherever you hear my voice, and that is not something to simply take for granted, or even to minimize, but it is the very thing upon which our faith is built, is that there is a working it out. And that, so when we hear Paul's charge of an invitation to the church in Philippi to work out your salvation with fear and trembling, he's not saying you are abandoned, and if you don't work it out, if you can't do the algebra, you're doomed. He's saying, let God do God's work with you. Empty yourself out of all the things that you're holding on to, all the things that you think can't be changed, all the things that God can't heal, all the things that are so broken that they cannot somehow be. Empty them out, because he made himself nothing. You can too. Be obedient to the cross. Enter into your suffering and let it go. And then let in God's process with you and your life. And that is the working it out. That is the invitation to be to a life filled with abundance, and a life filled with love and grace and joy. That in all of it, God's grace and God's peace and God's wonder and all good gifts that our Father in heaven would seek to give us come through this way. Work it out, friends. Work it out, because God himself is working it out with you. Peace and grace to you, my friends. We'll pick it up tomorrow with another 11:11.